Learning to learn is about developing the skills we need to learn most effectively and independently.
It's about learning to manage our emotions. It's about learning strategies that we can use in order to become better learners. Because our environment's constantly changing, it's really important that we continue to learn so that we're able to adapt and take advantage of new opportunities.
Teachers can help their students to develop learning to learn skills in the classroom by including reflective activities that help their learners to evaluate how they've been doing in their tasks.
This helps learners think about what they've done, reflect on their learning and make changes if they need to.
Hi everyone, I'm still with the muting and unmuting. First of all, thank you to have you back here. I'm Renata Simões, your host for Cambridge Day 2020. And before I introduce our next speaker, I have some announcements to make. Big up for you guys on our chat, people from Argentina, from São Paulo, from Fortaleza. Alejandra, that was asking about the certificate. Our team will be talking to you soon there on our chat, explaining how to get the certificate. We'll have a link that to our survey that is aired after our seminar, and then in that you can add this link and put your name on it. Our team will support you, give you support on our chat. But now we're going to talk about our next speaker. She's actually been a wonderful person because she's 5 hours more than us. So if here is 4 p.m. in Brazil, she in Spain is now at 9 p.m. there. Oh my God. Samantha was in Brazil last year. She was supposed to come this year again, but the pandemic situation we are living in forced us to change our plans. Right, Samantha? Nice to have you here. Thank you very much. I know it's midnight there.
Yeah, it is. But in Spain, everything happens late, so that's fine.
Oh, so you're already in time. We are saying that collaboration in times of change is a very important skill that we all have to develop and to encourage teenagers to do it as well, right? I heard that sharing practical ideas with the participants, which teachers will be able to use with their students. Could you talk a little bit, in your opinion, one of the highlights of this seminar? You mean, what challenge have you faced teaching teenagers online?
Oh, many challenges, trying to engage them to interact in class, so finding ways that they can collaborate and work together, and also then maintain learning outside the class. So part of what I'll be talking about today is how to do that.
I imagine that can be hard because it is hard for us to keep our mind focused and to deal with everything. We can assume that for them it's hard as well, right? This period we are living in.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. And also they spend so much time online that it's, trying to engage them in their lesson and beyond can be challenging.
Yeah. Well, have a good webinar. We're here for you. Thank you very much for your presence at Cambridge Day 2020, Samantha.
Thank you very much, Renata. Hello, everybody. Welcome from Brazil and also from Argentina, I heard, and from wherever you're joining us from today. It's lovely to have you here, and I hope you find the session interesting for you today. My name's Samantha Lewis, and as Renata mentioned, I work and live in Spain, where I work for the British Council as their academic lead for secondary. So I look after the academic content for our secondary learners in Spain. And I've also worked for a number of years for Cambridge University Press, authoring materials for them, developing materials for secondary students. So one of the projects, the latest projects I've been working on is a course for secondary students, Own It, or also known as Collaborate, which also focuses on developing those ideas for secondary students. And obviously, given the present pandemic and situation we're in, I've been over the last few months very involved in supporting our students and our teachers transition from face-to-face learning to online learning, which I'm sure many of you are also finding yourself in a similar situation. So I'm hoping to bring some of that experience today to the talk and share some of those ideas with you, so that you can also use them together with your students. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, and have a look at the first slide that we have today. Okay, so I have a little activity to get you started. Just found this photo online and thought, okay, I could get you to perhaps think of a funny caption for the photo. So you can be thinking about that. I'll ask you in a moment if you've thought of a caption for the photo. But basically, we'll look at sort of ideas that you can do at the start of a lesson. We were talking about, one of the challenges of teaching teenagers is actually sort of engaging them and getting them focused on their English classes online. So, if you can have something fun at the beginning of the lesson whilst they're waiting for the lesson to start, to grab their attention and get them focused on the lesson and also thinking a little bit in English, and that's always a good thing. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're going to be looking at today. And basically, we're going to be looking at these two main areas. So thinking about our situation now, teaching online, or perhaps a mixture of teaching between an online class, synchronous class where we see our students and talk to them, and then delivering content asynchronously via different digital platforms, and thinking about helping our teenagers to be independent in that context and the life skills that they'll need to do that. And then looking at some practical ideas as well that we can use with them to develop these skills and these competencies to prepare them to do that. Okay, so let's just go back to basics for a second and think about what learner autonomy actually is. So in the words of Jack C. Richards, he defines it as the principle that learners should take an increasing amount of responsibility for what they learn and how they learn it. And I don't think that has changed in the context that we are in now. And it's even more relevant, I would say, now that we're spending as teachers less time together with our students, but having to sort of guide them to learn in not just together with us, but by themselves. So it's even more important that they are more independent in their learning. Okay, so what we can do as teachers really is help our learners, guide them to play an active role in their learning, in their own learning, to make decisions about their learning, informed decisions, and also help them to reflect on and evaluate their learning in a constructive way. Okay, so let's for a second just think about who our learners are. And they're not just learning English, they're 21st century learners learning lots of other skills as well. So they're learning all of these different life skills that we can see here now. And part of our role is to help them to develop all of those skills, and creativity as well. They will be developing these skills in their other school subjects as well. So it's not just something that will happen in their English classes, but they'll play a role in language learning as well. And obviously, the more they develop each of these skills, the more competent 21st century global learners they become. Okay. What Cambridge have done is identified or put together a framework which categorizes these 21st century skills into two main areas. So we've got thinking and learning skills, and then the social and emotional skills. And they have looked at ways that we as teachers can develop each of these skills individually in the classroom, but also together. They're not always skills that we do develop individually. They often complement each other, and in the same activity, we're often developing more than one of these skills at the same time. Okay, so today I would like us to think about ways that we can help our teens to learn how to learn, to think, and to work together in an online context, and within that, help to make themselves become more independent learners. Okay, so the first area we can focus on is helping our teenagers to organize their learning. So they're now sort of working within this unfamiliar learning context for them, maybe for other subjects, but particularly for those of them who are used to sort of seeing their teacher face to face, perhaps every day or 2 or 3 times a week. All of a sudden, they might only see their teacher once a week. And then there might be other parts of their learning which they have to organize for themselves. So it's really important for them to have a really clear understanding of how their course is structured now. So in order to help our learners then to organize themselves and their work, these are some of the things that they need to understand about their course. So what is the actual content? What are they going to be covering during the course? And what are the aims of what they're covering on a weekly basis or every month, or perhaps over the duration of the complete course? And then it's also really important to explain to them how the course material is structured. So whereas maybe everything in face-to-face classes was covered in a course book, and then the teachers sort of set them activities to do for homework, you may find now that the course content is divided between different digital platforms, activities they have to do by themselves, and then an online class. So it's important for them as well to understand how the course is structured and the weighting of the different parts of the course, how it all works together. And then also, what the balance is between those synchronous activities that you do with them in an online classroom, and then which asynchronous learning activities they are expected to cover outside that classroom. And if they, for example, have to upload work to a certain platform, or they've got to complete work by a certain deadline, that they're really clear on what that is, what they have to do. If you do have access to a learning management system, that's quite a good way of keeping track of student progress and how they're getting on with these activities they do by themselves, and just making sure that they are on track and that they know how much they've got to complete each week or each month. You can help them with that. Okay, so as we said at the beginning, a really nice way to get them engaged with their online classes is to have a fun activity for them at the beginning of class. So this is just one example here. Also a little reminder, to come along to the class with a notebook and pen. So they're not just going to sit and look at the screen, but you do actually want them to participate and make notes and get involved in the activities. And then also think of perhaps, as I say, in this particular case, a funny caption. So I don't know if anybody managed to write, think of a caption for this particular photo and share it in the chat. Have a look if we have any examples. In a class, you can actually get the students to be thinking of different captions, and then you can vote on them and decide on the funniest. Okay. I like this one, l'amazing picture, the llama there. What do you think of this? Please don't bite me. Okay, so great ideas there. Okay, other ways that you can engage your teenage learners right at the beginning of class. You could do it through different kind of word games or word activities, recycling language from the last class. So trying to see what they remember Okay, got lots of different ideas that you can work with here. Or this one's is quite a nice one. It's an alphabet race. So depending on whatever the theme is of your class, or the topic of the class, you can, as the students are waiting for the class to begin, perhaps you're waiting for other students to arrive, ask them to think of one word for each letter of the alphabet related to a certain theme. So in this case, we've got holidays. So they think of one word that relates to holidays that begins with each letter of the alphabet. Then once you're in class, you can just then give them a letter of the alphabet and they have to write in their word that corresponds to that. Okay. Another way of beginning the class, obviously with different kinds of word puzzles, all of these you can prepare beforehand and just have waiting on the screen so they've got something to look at and to start thinking about and to recycle their language before you start. Okay. Okay, once you actually begin the lesson itself, I think it's always really important for students to be really clear about what the aims are of each particular class so they know what they're going to be covering in that class. I think as well it helps teachers to organise what they're teaching as well if they're very clear about what they're going to be covering in each class. And those aims could cover perhaps the linguistic content or perhaps some of the skills that you're also going to be developing too. And you can just put a little menu on the first slide for them which covers what they will be covering during the class so they know what to expect. And then likewise, we can help them organise their learning at the end of the class too. Okay, so at the end of the class, I think it's always valuable to put aside a couple of minutes for students to reflect on what they've just learnt with you, what they've learnt together in the class. And to also personalize it as well. So for them to, you can give them sentence starters, like in this case, just to sort of think back over the class and think about what they've learnt, maybe some new language they've taken away from the class. And also, particularly as we are now in this context where they're going to be working alone, to make it really clear about what is expected of them to do before the next class. So by answering that last question, it'll be really clear to you as well that they understand what they need to do. If they need to upload anything, send anything to you, complete any activities, do some research, whatever it is. So helping them to sort of organise that learning outside the class. I think that's really important. Okay. In terms of helping teens learn how to learn, as well, there are also some techniques that we can show them in our online classes. So the time that we have together with them, we can prepare them for the time that they are learning by themselves. So showing them different ways, for example, of recording new language, new vocabulary, different ways of approaching a listening or a reading text or perhaps a video, different ways of reviewing and editing their own written work before they submit it to you, and then helping them to reflect on and evaluate their learning. So, for example, when we're talking about recording new language, we could divide that into two different types of language. So in this case, we're looking at target language. So by that, I mean sort of all the words that are sort of selected as part of a course content, usually sort of related by theme, so a lexical set of words, or by part of speech, by the grammar of the words, but already sort of pre-selected according to the level of the students. So once they've actually learnt these words, what we need to do is to introduce different ways that they can record that language so that they can then recycle it and refer to it later on, to help, memorize the language and remember it and use it in the future. So there are different ways that we can do this. For example, we could get them to record the new language in a table, so by categorizing it, or also we have the example here of using spidergrams to make it a very visual representation of the words. Pictures as well obviously work really, really well depending on the type of word. or perhaps using the words in sentences, in example sentences, using even translation as well as a different way of recording it, or recording pairs of words together. Obviously, it's going to depend on the language itself that they're recording, that they're learning. And then we've got this other area of language, emergent language. So this kind of language, by this I mean all of that language that just sort of emerges during the lesson that students ask for or need in order to complete other activities. So this is really sort of important area of language, very interesting area of language, because it's a language that students actually want to learn. That's what they're asking you for. But it's also very personalized. So there may be some students that know the language, whereas others in the class don't. What is important, though, is that we do, when that language does emerge during the class, is that we record it and then we think of ways of recycling it later on so that it does become part of their active vocabulary. So what I've got here is just a screenshot from a classroom in Zoom, in this case, and just sort of an example of how you can divide part of the board and keep it to one side just to record any language that comes up during the lesson. And you'll see that the words are not necessarily related. They can be sort of very random words. So, you know, providing the part of speech as well to help the students know the grammar of the word, and also where the stars are, you can see it's helping students to remember the stress of the word, so help them with the pronunciation of it too. Okay. And then in terms of how we help students to recycle this language, you know, again, at the end of an online class, you could perhaps play a game, typical sort of word game, Pictionary, Taboo, or a miming game to recycle the language at the end of the class. Or then perhaps at the beginning of the next class, on that first sort of welcome slide, you could have anagrams of the words or some other activity that helps them to recycle this language. Okay, now when we've got sort of limited time as well with our students during the week or during the course, we probably don't want to spend all of our time focusing on listening activities or reading activities that they could do by themselves. We obviously want to maximize that online class time to helping them with their speaking skills, develop their speaking skills and collaboration, working together. So if we're going to be asking them to listen to a text or to read something, or perhaps even watch a video by themselves, perhaps before the next online lesson, then it's even more important that they learn all of these learning strategies, to know how to approach a text and to be able to get the most out of the text and to help their comprehension of that text. So introducing different ways, for example, of taking notes in the case of when they're listening, or different ways what they need to do in order to help them to learn to listen for specific information there. So reading the task they need to do beforehand so they know exactly what they're listening for. Or in the case of a reading, actually sort of teaching them how they skim a text, what that means, and how to do that and why we do that. Or obviously, again, with reading, how to use the text of surrounding language to help them to understand words from context. So these are all, obviously, all of these kind of strategies and tips we'll need to introduce to them in the online class so that they can then use them by themselves when they are learning alone. Okay, and then another area which is really interesting to sort of engage them in their own learning by helping them to set their own objectives. Because I think if they are involved in this, obviously that they're going to take more interest in that aspect of their learning, because they're going to have more of an interest in achieving those objectives. This is just one example here, which again is sort of related to receptive skills. But just helping students, for example, there's a scale here. So you can see at the bottom, you've got sort of much easier tasks. So understanding main ideas in a news story. So is a typo there, news story or a TV program. but not the details, right through to sort of following films with lots of slang and idiomatic use of language. So one thing that we can ask students to do is to identify where they are on that scale. So what they feel they can already do by themselves, where they'd like to get to. Okay, so this is sort of helping them to be realistic too about what their learning objectives are. And then thinking about how they can actually get there. So this is where they're thinking of, what they're going to invest in their learning here to help them to achieve their own objectives. And so, if basically their aim is to want to be able to understand TV programs of personal interest to themselves, here they can create their own little action plan. So that might involve something like saying they're going to take their favorite TV series and watch 5 minutes of it in their own language, and then watch the same 5 minutes again in English. And then maybe focus on words or new words or expressions in those 5 minutes, and then look up how they're said in their own language, so that they work out what they mean. Or perhaps they are going to watch 10 minutes of their favorite show in English with the subtitles in English. But sort of setting their own sort of realistic action plan that will little by little help them to achieve their own objectives. And something like this, which obviously is something that a lot of students are interested in doing, following different TV shows or videos on YouTube or films. It's something that we can sort of incorporate into their own learning, or it could be listening to music and songs, something like that. Okay, another area that we can obviously help them to sort of reflect on their own learning is through the use of sort of self-assessment activities. So little activities like these are very simple to complete and can be completed by students by themselves. So they reflect on, how well they feel they've learnt these areas, but then taking it one step further and helping them to then, once they've decided how successful their learning has been in each of these areas, well, what happens next? So obviously in the case that they, for example, or with the sports, for example, maybe they know all of the sports in English and they know all of the sports verbs and they learn them really easily. Well, the next step then would be to take that one step further and to focus on perhaps other areas of vocabulary related to sports that they could look at. So different types of equipment or different types of people related to sports, something like that. So to stretch them, extend their language. Or equally, if they struggled with any of the areas of language, then to help them to know where to look for reinforcement, to then go back and to look at perhaps the rules of comparative adjectives again, and some more guided practice to help them to really understand that area. So not just self-assessing, but then deciding what happens next, what are their next steps in order to help their progress. Okay, and then we also mentioned, helping them to check their own writing. So this is just an example here. I'll just show you close up. So obviously students, and they're always going to make mistakes in their writing. That's part of learning. What's really useful for them is to be able to identify their common mistakes. So mistakes that they often make, and to become aware of those, because then if they do that, when they come to edit their work and review their work, they can always be on the lookout for those particular mistakes that they often make, and they train themselves to be able to correct them. So this is just a way of introducing this to students. So first of all, they look at another student's common mistakes, and then they correct those, and then they analyze their own last piece of writing. And this is something that you can do just by keeping a track in their own notebook. And over time, they'll see that maybe they do always make the same mistake, but then by focusing on that, gradually they will learn to just automatically correct that mistake. Particularly useful, obviously, when they're going to be doing exams when they're in a context where they've got to be reviewing their own writing, that they can then look through their writing and and really focus on that. They're not always very good at doing that, and sometimes there can, in my experience, some of my students be a bit lazy about doing that, but perhaps you can actually even dedicate time in class to train them to look for those mistakes. Or again, an initial activity that you could have on the screen at the start are a few examples of their writing, some of which include good use of English and some of which include some of their typical mistakes for them to pick out and correct. Okay, so there's just the idea to make a list of their own personalized common mistakes in their writing. Okay, another area which obviously we want to encourage them to reflect on their learning. One of the challenges as well, Renata was asking earlier, the challenges of teaching online, is as a teacher being able to assess their listening or reading ability in this context that we're in now, because you often find that a lot of those activities they're asked to do by themselves online might just have a right or wrong answer, and they can just sort of click on it several times until they get the right answer. So it's very difficult sometimes for us to know as teachers how well they've actually understood something. So this is a tool that I found quite useful in terms of helping to set different types of tasks, and one way that you can approach assessment. And it's using an online forms. In this case, it's Microsoft Forms, but there are Google Forms and other different ones that you can use. So basically, this is just an example of one that I have used, and it includes, so it's a way of encouraging students to do a viewing activity outside class with just some very 2 or 3 very, very basic questions, but ones that don't necessarily have a right or wrong answer, but show me to what extent they've understood the video. So I'm not, the idea wasn't to sort of ask them hundreds of questions that was going to take a long time to correct, but just ask just a couple of really significant questions that would show me that they had understood the main ideas in the video. But also you could equally use it to ask them what their opinion is as well of maybe the topics covered in a video or in a reading text or whatever. And by creating these activities on something like Microsoft Forms, what they do is, as you create the activities and obviously you include the questions, you can then create a link. Well, this is just the link of where the video comes from Learn English Teens, but then the form itself, you can create either a QR code or a link that you can share with students. They can then open that and complete the activity outside class, and then their answers will go directly to you and to that form, and you'll be able to have a look at how well they've completed the tasks. And you'll be able to see how long they've spent actually doing the activity. So it's a little bit of insight for you as a teacher as to the time that they're spending doing the activities and the extent to which they've understood a particular text. So equally, you could set up a reflection task. So you could have some questions which ask them personalized questions on how they feel they're getting on the course, which are the areas they feel they've made most progress in, which areas they'd like to make more progress in, or just for some interesting homework. So not even for assessment. You could ask them to complete this to get an idea for something you're going to talk about in the next class, or within a class you could actually create one that they work on together, share the link, and then together they can be writing an activity together in class. So different ways that they can be used. Okay, let's now think about ways that we can encourage our teenagers to think. Obviously, the more that they can think for themselves, the more independent they are going to become, and the more responsibility they'll take for their learning. So, some of the ways that as teachers we can encourage them to think are the way that we, the kind of tasks that we ask them to do in class. So we can sort of move from just asking them what they can see to kind of progressing to asking them what they think about a certain subject, or perhaps even wonder. So trying to encourage more of those higher order thinking skills during the class. And an easy way of doing that is through the use of pictures. So I have a picture here, which is quite an intriguing picture. Some of the sort of typical course book questions that you might get, or approaches to, that we would ask students, is to ask them to describe what they can see and what the person is doing. It's obviously valuable in its own right. In terms of language production, obviously, I think we can predict what students are going to say, because they're obviously going to be describing the position of different things in the picture, perhaps the colours, the materials, and obviously what they can see. But if we want to try and encourage them with the same picture, we can just adapt these kind of questions to encourage them to think a little bit more detail, a bit deeper about certain things relating to the picture. So it could be, for example, asking students why they think this person is there, or what that person is thinking at this point in time, what he can see, what she can see, and what happened prior to this photo in order to set it up. Okay, so all of these questions, and there's no right or wrong answer, but what you are doing is encouraging students to think through their answers before they share them. Okay, actually is a Belgian visual artist there called Ben Hein, and these are the different types of photos that he creates, which are very interesting for students to discuss. Okay, or a very sort of typical kind of memory photo, so showing students an interesting photograph and then taking it away and asking them to comment on what they remember seeing in the photo. Okay, that's a very easy one to set up, but what you're doing there, not just asking students about what they're the vocabulary of what's in the photo, but also asking them to sort of, you're training their memory skills, they're making them more observant. Okay, and that's an artist actually from Portugal called Bordalo too, who creates all of this art from rubbish as a sort of bit of a statement as to, helping the environment. Okay, now thinking about sort of how we can help our teens to work together. We're actually we've been talking about sort of making them independent learners, but by helping them to work together, we're actually helping them to be less dependent on the teacher and become more resourceful, and to find sort of ways of working, as I say, away from expecting everything from the teacher to tell them to do everything. So in a sense, become more independent. Okay, so we're going to look at different ways that we can do that. So different ways of developing collaboration and working well together with their peers. Obviously in an online context, using breakout rooms. So those of you who are familiar with different platforms like Zoom will know that you can. There are breakout rooms where we can put students to work together collaboratively on different projects. It's a really, really useful tool to be able to use. But I just want to point out a few sort of features and a few tips to kind of make them as effective as possible. So you can often decide sort of how many breakout rooms you want to create. Depending on the size of your class, you maybe want to have 4 students in a group. Depends on the activity. It's always an idea to create a couple of extra breakout rooms in case you want to move students around once the activity is up and running. Because once they've actually started the activity, it's difficult to set up more breakout rooms. And you may find that you just want to assign them to the breakout rooms randomly, or actually name which students go into which breakout rooms, which takes a little bit of extra planning on your part. Okay, but there might be very good reasons for doing that. Okay, just a few tips then before using breakout rooms. So making sure that students do have a very, very clear and achievable task, so they know exactly what they're going to be doing, and that you check the instructions before you move the students. You may want to share the instructions via the chat with them, or via a link to somewhere where they can see what they have to do, so that they always know exactly what they need to do. So also thinking about a realistic time limit, and having something that fast finishers can do if they complete everything within that time limit. It's always an idea as well to sort of select a spokesperson, so that they can report back to the class when you bring everybody back to the breakout room, and also to monitor students in those breakout rooms, so you can sort of have a look at what they're working on together. And just to sort of cover the basic class rules before, because obviously in breakout rooms, it's not the same as monitoring in a face-to-face class where you can automatically see what everybody is doing. So just reviewing what your class rules are there. Okay, in terms of sort of creating that task with a sense of achievement, a very clear task, just an example here. So we could ask students just a question like, why do people do extreme sports in this particular example? Or we could ask them to make it more specific by giving them a number. So think of 3 or more reasons why people do extreme sports. So we're giving them their very clear task within the question. And once they reach 3 reasons, they've got a sense of achievement, they've completed the task. But you're also catering for fast finishers. They can think of more if they want to, and if they have time to. And also, you know, in the time limit, then ask them sort of how many words can they think of within the time limit, or how many, in this case, ways can they think of finishing or completing this question. Okay, and making it into this kind of competition to keep them focused. Here are some sort of examples of tasks that lend themselves quite nicely to breakout rooms, to working in small groups online. So where they've got a task, they've got to discuss different options and come together to make a decision. Or a dictogloss, we'll have a look at an example of one of those in a moment. Or collaborative writing tasks, or a peer teaching task where they teach each other something. So just a few examples then. This is just very simple to do and set up, but this is just a task, a text that's actually taken from a course book that you're using. In this case, it's about free ice cream, so that's always going to get people interested. And then in terms of setting it up, a dictogloss, you could just literally take the first paragraph of a text and read it a couple of times at normal speed. So this is in the whole classroom, so all students are listening at this stage, and just encourage them to write down the keywords as they listen. And then you can put them into breakout rooms to then reconstruct the text in their own words, but that means that is as close in meaning as possible to the text. So they're really sort of focusing on listening for key ideas, and then they are focusing on structure and vocabulary and collaboration as they piece together a text and try and reproduce that text. So that's a very simple way of doing dictogloss in a breakout room. As I said, collaborative writing. So in this particular case, once they've focused on the artist, this is the artist that we looked at before, they also create their own little kind of guide or profile, fact file of an artist. So in breakout rooms, they could be encouraged to research a different artist of their own choice, and then put together some information about that artist, which they then share. So you can share a collaborative space with them where they can put that information. So collaborative space like Padlet, I'm sure many of you are familiar with using Padlet, but somewhere where the students can go online and post up their ideas, and then they can also comment on each other's ideas. That's a very easy way to sort of link those spaces to the online classrooms so that they can use those. Okay. And then peer teaching as well, so using breakout rooms to encourage students to teach each other new language or different ideas, new ideas. So this is just taken from a very sort of straightforward word to definition matching activity. But just with a little bit of preparation from the teacher, you can set it up as a breakout activity. So I'll just show you an example of how to do that. So if we've got our, in this case, they are adjectives to describe personality, different adjectives of personality. So instead of the students just matching the adjectives to the definitions, what we can do is divide our students. So in the case of, say, a group of 18 students, divide them into 3 different groups. So I would show them this with their names if they're in the red group there, the names in the green group, and the names of the students in the purple group, and then their particular adjectives underneath in that group. And then basically this does require a little bit of extra, well, homework, should we say, from students. So what they need to do before the next online class is go away and write different definitions for these words and then find the opposite adjectives. So they've got a very concrete task they need to do before the next class. And then when you bring them together in the next class, what you would need to do is then regroup your students. Okay, so that in each new group of students, you've got 1 student of each colour, those different groups, red group, green group, and the purple group. And then what they're going to do is they teach their words to the other students in their group. So they listen to each other to learn the other words, and then they actually explain their words to the rest of their group and their opposite adjectives. So it's kind of a nice sort of quite a dynamic way of using the breakout room, and just a normal sort of activity that you probably already have access to in your course materials. Okay. So that sort of brings us to the end of this part of the presentation. So we've looked at sort of different ideas that we can use to help our students to learn how to learn. So looking at all of those, how to organise their learning, different strategies they can use to help their learning, helping them to work together, and also helping them how to think for themselves and to be independent. And just like you for a second, just to think about your own learners. And then just by reminding you of some of those activities and ideas that we've looked at, think about which ones you think would work well with your students, or that you would most like to try out with your students. I'll leave that there as a summary. And I think now if we have time for any questions, we can have a look at people's questions.
Hi, Samantha. Thank you very much for your presentation. And we will have, yes, a lot of questions. Actually, we have a Q&A with you. But first, I'm going to invite you to watch with me something that we are all very curious. It's a small video about Own It, Cambridge University Press new series for team. So let us see a video about it, and then when we return, we start the Q&A session.
Perfect.
Own It is the brand new course that helps students take ownership of their learning. To gain valuable insights which helped us define and shape the course, we decided to visit real classrooms around the world and test drive the course with teachers and students as it was being developed. Teachers told us they wanted to inspire their students to work collaboratively, but often felt they lacked the support and the time to manage classroom projects. So we designed a course that not only empowers teachers, but also allows students to own their learning.
I was checking here, like hiding the questions that already came to us. Let me just turn on another one light, because here in my house there are a lot of windows, and when the lights change, nobody can see me again. Well, let's start our Q&A session. I think the first question is from Breno from Pretopolis. He asks you, Samantha, how can we make teens be interested in English when they are been obligated to do it by their parents. I would add a question as someone who was obligated by their parents to learn English, but fortunately I like it. How you can put more layers on teaching to make people more interested on learning and understanding the importance on it?
That's a really challenging question. I mean, obviously, that's one of the difficulties that we do face, particularly with teenagers, that they can be sometimes a bit reluctant. But I think a lot of the ideas that we were talking about today, so different ways of engaging them, so making activities fun, giving them opportunities to show you what they know. So not just sort of listening and learning, but actually being active and being involved in their learning, using ideas and materials, contexts that relate to their lives. So if we're talking about helping them to think about their own learning objectives, or making that really relevant to what they actually want to get out of their own, personalizing, I suppose, a lot of what you do in the class so that it feels relevant to them, and you know, lots of games or, you know, ways of engaging them at the beginning of the class, at the end of the class, and I suppose that element of surprise as well, so it's not always the same every time, with a sense of that they are getting something as well from the class.
Teenagers, right? We have to keep them. I always say it's like they all remind me of this Nirvana song, like "Here we are now, entertain us," because it's hard. There are a lot of people thanking you for your seminar here on our chat. I'm going to go to our next question. Let's see if it will appears on our screen now. Oh, see, I'm going back. Diana Boring from Americana, São Paulo. She asks, do you believe it's possible to work with flipped classroom with teenagers?
Sometimes. I think, yeah, obviously it's ideal, but the teenagers need to be on board with it as well. So they need to kind of see the relevance of it and how it works. And I think it depends a lot on the context. It is really difficult to get all students, to ensure that all students go away and do the activities that you need them to do, to then bring them to the classroom and be able to build on those activities. So just thinking of sort of the most engaging ways of doing that possible. So I mean, it's something that may be building up over a period of time, so creating really sort of short activities that are not going to take them too long to do, that, you know, are achievable for them, is a way of sort of leading them into it. And then obviously once they've done something away from the online classroom, referring to it in the online classroom and making it relevant and interesting so that they can see the point of doing it. Otherwise they won't do it. So again, it's sort of making them really sort of aware of how the synchronous and asynchronous learning links together.
Yeah, perfect. Just a small. Cláudia Regina from Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais asks how to work out the teen shyness or the fear to be mocked. I think this is a special. It's valid not only to shyness and to fear, but sometimes people from different countries have different relations on showing up themselves in classroom and make mistakes. Could you put everything that together on your answer, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously teenagers are, you know, more conscious of what their peers think of them as what anybody else thinks of them. So that's a huge consideration. So I mean, as a teacher, I think you're kind of aware of who your shyer students are, your more confident students are, or it's part of your job to do that, so that they're not sort of put on the spot and made to feel very self-conscious. At the same time, sort of making it part of your your methodology in the way that you teach, that mistakes are a part of learning. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's everybody makes mistakes, and if you don't make mistakes, then you're never going to learn. So I think that's really, really important, and not always focus on the accuracy. So focus on the interest of what people are saying and the ideas that they're communicating, and not just whether they're using their verbs correctly or they've forgotten to add the third person s or whatever. So I think it's sort of really and finding opportunities maybe to work in smaller groups that can help shy students too. So rather than speaking in front of the whole class, again, as we looked at those kind of ideas for using breakout rooms, and just when they do look as though they're ready to respond, then going with that and encouraging them to take part, but not forcing them to do so if you can see they're suffering.
There was a teacher here on the chat said, okay, for me it's even harder because I didn't manage to make them turn on their camera. I heard that this is a strong issue during the online classroom. But now we have Rodrigo Jorge Miguel da Silva asking how to go about speaking and writing when you work elementary, middle and high schools. Should they be asked to record themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think recording themselves, I mean, obviously giving them sort of guidelines about what you want them to do with that recording. I mean, we looked at Padlet as well earlier as a kind of collaborative space. Any collaborative spaces like that, one of a little task that it could do as well as writing is to record themselves and upload those recordings to the page for their classmates to listen to. I would say if it's elementary though, well, depending on the levels, just to keep the tasks really straightforward and achievable so that they know exactly what they need to do and they can do it. But I think, also collaborative tasks, I think are a good way to help students to improve and work together and gain confidence together in speaking and in writing.
Perfect. Next question, Claudia Fischer from São Paulo. It's very hard to motivate our students nowadays and make them to do the homework. Any better tips? I will add something that people here on the chat is here on my they're all saying, oh, teenagers are so hard nowadays. I think it was Erika Bodivan, and there is another one person, Amanda Borges. Oh, teens, they don't want to do anything anymore. Could you join those two issues also on your answer, please? So how do we motivate them to study and to make them do the homework?
I think, well, I mean, teenagers will do something if they're interested in doing it. So it's kind of tapping into what they're interested in doing. So if that means that you're going to ask them to create a little video that explains how to make something or ways of whatever it is that you're focusing about, or maybe a little video showing their neighborhood and talking to the camera and explaining things, anything that you think will get them interested. And then also maybe working together in small groups so that they kind of, if they don't do it, they're not just letting themselves down, but they're going to be letting other people down as well. So they might feel more motivated to produce something if they're working on it together, and they kind of, help each other and motivate each other to produce something.
Daniela Sansoni from Piracicaba asks, can you suggest the best activities to do with teenagers during this pandemic online teaching times?
Well, probably things that help them to keep their minds off what's going on. But I think activities that keep them connected as well. If you're asking them to do things outside the class, then ways that they can work together, because obviously a lot of them are isolated in their homes and they're not allowed to get together with their friends. So obviously, activities like that. And then in the class, just focusing on things that they are interested in and things that, whatever they are interested in talking about, or I think rather than just the pandemic situation, just in terms of online, all of those ideas that we've looked at, to sort of exploit the online learning classroom.
Okay, next question, Daniele Burinha, Americana, São Paulo. How to motivate teenagers to do their homework? That's a pretty similar to the other one. Do you have any miracle tip suggestion?
I don't think there is a miracle, but just always sort of choosing interesting homework. So not sort of typical fill in the gap activities that maybe they just can't see the point of, but something where they have to bring something to the class and then share that with the class and explain something about it. Or, as I say, work together with other classmates to create something or produce something together. Or research for something you're then going to use in class. So if you're going to be talking about different artists, maybe for homework, or they go away and they research street artists in their country or in other countries, and they find some examples of interesting artwork that they've done. Or they take photos of things around their neighborhood that relate to the theme, and they bring those along. So I think sort of thinking about more interesting ways of actually what we call homework.
Yeah. Next question, Marilene Almeida. I'd like to know what is the most effective and attractive online technique to use with teens.
Effective and attractive online technique. I mean, I think it's a combination of using, lots of different activities that are going to engage them, using the time that we have with them to then be able to help them when they're by themselves. It's a difficult question to answer. I'm not really sure. Maybe sort of help using learning management systems where they can see, where you as a teacher can see what else they're doing online when they are away from class. But I would say, again, with everything, using a variety of activities so they don't get bored as well, always doing the same thing.
Of course. Next question. Juliana from São Paulo would like to know your opinion about kindergarten. Can we treat them in the same way we do as with teenagers?
Oh, I think it's very different teaching very young learners. Obviously, they don't even know, the difference between one language and another. I mean, what we're doing there is just teaching the whole child, no? So teaching them things that they would do in their own language, but in another language. So lots of songs and just play and stories and all of those things. Obviously involving, as I say, the whole child. Which you're involving the whole teenager, if you like, but I think it is different because of what they already know as well about learning.
There were a lot of questions about actually the platform, because you mentioned that breakup rooms and alternatives, and people say, hey, I use Teams, and with Teams I can get it, or with blah blah blah. What I would like to could you give us actually, or could you give our teachers kind of a support on that, like no matter which platform you use, how you can use this breakup idea model you propose in
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it doesn't have that facility, it's difficult to create that. I suppose one way around it could be to create, as we talked about, sort of using links, which could be linked to, say, Google Drive or something like that, where you could share a different link with each group of students so that they would have their own space to work in, or as I said, using something like a collaborative space like Padlet, where they can also access and work together on something there. And then maybe setting up tasks so that they do have to then get together outside class and for a short time but work on something together, and then if they are all in the same classroom, perhaps there can be activities where the rest of the class are getting on with something, whereas the teacher just focuses on just one smaller group, and then they swap around.
No. Thank you very much for your time, for your attention, Samantha. I know that probably now it's 10 p.m. there, so we would let you rest. Have a good night there. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me, and I hope that everybody found those ideas useful. And good luck with your future teaching.
Thank you. Any last words for our teachers that are thanking you here, giving you virtual hugs? Wash hands, wash hands, wash hands.
Just good luck, and just trying out different activities and ideas, and just seeing what works well for you and your students. I think is the best advice.
Perfect. Thank you again, Samantha. And I will, for those who are staying with me here, we have a few advices before our next lecture, our next Inspire session. First of all, I want to give a big up to Felipe Dirceu, Bruno Batalha, Miley Campos, that were all on Instagram saying, hey, we are seeing you at Cambridge Day 2020. Thank you very much for being with us here. As you know, as a part of Cambridge Day tradition, as a part of actually Cambridge Day events, we have this tradition. We request our participants and partners to donate food to local institutions. This year, we are talking about Ação pela Cidadania, which is a very well-known NGO in Brazil that since 1993 fights against hunger and poverty. So if you want to share, actually, if you want to help them, if you want to join us on this fight against hunger and poverty that these years is more important than ever, here is the QR code. Don't forget to answer our survey. I know that you guys got a little anxious about it. There are a lot of questions on our chat. But at the end of each session, we have the link for you guys to answer the survey and get your editable certificates. Okay, you can add your name on it, and then then you can download it. Now we're going to our next webinar, which is also a recorded one, spoken only on Portuguese, but it's time for you two guys to listen, to relax. Tatiana Fernandez is talking about mindfulness to increase focus. It's one of the main topics of the last year regarding mental health. Mindfulness is a very important subject, and I think will interest you guys, you teachers, the most. The webinar, as I said, is in Portuguese only, but I'm sure you're going to like it. Tatiana will be on chat to answer your questions, and after that, we'll have a small break and then return for the last webinar of the day. Enjoy your mindfulness time.
Olá, eu sou a Tatiana Fernandes, eu sou Wellness Coach, instrutora de Mindfulness da Hora Clara. Faço um convite para vocês nesse momento, encontrando uma posição confortável. Pode ser sentado numa cadeira, com os pés apoiados no chão, ou sentado na posição que você se sentir mais confortável. Você pode fazer essa prática também deitado, se preferir. Tente aproveitar esse momento da melhor forma, se entregando com curiosidade e abertura ao momento. Não se preocupe com julgamentos e pensamentos, lembrando que pensar é normal, os pensamentos vão vir, na medida do possível, você vai deixar com que esses pensamentos vão e voltar a atenção ao foco, o foco da sua respiração. Vamos lá? Então, eu convido você a fechar os seus olhos, ou mantê-los entreabertos. se conectando com o seu corpo, observando o corpo no espaço, observando a superfície de contato, o contato dos pés com o chão, o contato do corpo com a superfície em que se encontra. E gentilmente, levando a sua atenção para a sua respiração, onde ela se fizer mais evidente. Pode ser que você sinta nesse momento a sua respiração, pelo movimento provocado no seu corpo, pelo movimento no seu peito, no seu abdômen. Então você pode até mesmo colocar as suas mãos sobre o seu peito, o seu abdômen e sentir a presença da sua respiração, sentindo o seu corpo. Ou pode ser, para você neste momento, a sua respiração esteja mais presente na entrada e saída de ar pelas suas narinas. Você pode sentir talvez um formigamento nessa região, uma vibração, uma mudança de temperatura entre a sua inspiração e a sua expiração. Ou pode ser que nesse momento não seja possível identificar qualquer sensação. Você não precisa se preocupar em buscar ou nomear qualquer sensação deste momento. Apenas tente se abrir para sentir, para acolher qualquer sensação e sentimento presentes nesse momento. Tentando se conectar com esse momento através da sua respiração. Inspirando e expirando. Você pode talvez seguir o ritmo da sua respiração, acompanhar o ciclo completo da sua respiração. Do começo até o fim. Começando por sua inspiração, sentindo o ar entrando no seu corpo, percorrendo pelo canal do seu nariz, descendo por sua garganta, levando vida, nutrição para todo o corpo, da cabeça aos pés, dos pés à cabeça, levando oxigenação, chegando a todas as suas células, tecidos, órgãos, ossos, preenchendo o seu corpo, cada espaço livre, e permitindo que seu corpo funcione, permitindo a vida para si mesmo, para o seu corpo, observando a sua respiração nesse exato momento, se abrindo para qualquer sensação. Pode ser que nesse momento você sinta uma sensação física no seu corpo, intensa, um desconforto ou uma sensação de relaxamento. Você queira se aproximar mentalmente. Então você pode levar gentilmente a sua respiração para esse ponto. e perceber melhor o que acontece, acolhendo esse momento, acolhendo um sentimento que possa estar envolvido, um formigamento, observando diferentes temperaturas pelo seu corpo. Pode ser que tenha uma parte que esteja mais fria e outra mais quente. Ou pode ser que nesse momento as suas sensações estejam nulas, estejam neutras, que não seja possível identificar qualquer sensação presente. E tudo bem. Lembrando que se algum pensamento surgir neste momento, ou em qualquer parte desta prática, receba com gentileza, como se fosse a sua imagem, um reflexo na água. Toque essa imagem, observe e deixe ir. Pode até mesmo parecer com as nuvens no céu, que vêm e que vão, às vezes mais rápido, outras vezes elas ficam paradas ali um momento. Você pode observar, assim como seus pensamentos. Talvez em um momento você se veja embarcado em um pensamento por alguns minutos, segundos. E você pode então decidir o momento de retornar a sua atenção para a sua respiração e as sensações corporais presentes nesse momento. Inspirando e expirando. Sentindo e buscando talvez a sua respiração em outros pontos do seu corpo. Um movimento sutil nas suas costas, na cervical, ou leve subir e descer de seus ombros. Ou não, ou talvez não seja possível sentir em outro ponto a sua respiração. Então apenas tente se conectar com a sua respiração, onde ela estiver mais presente. E repouse por um instante a sua atenção neste ponto. E fique por um tempo de observador, apenas observando a sua respiração, indo e vindo, inspirando e expirando. E pousando a atenção e ficando um tempo em silêncio, apenas observando o ato natural de respirar. Inspirando e expirando, com tranquilidade, com abertura ao momento e sem julgamento, obedecendo seus limites, o seu corpo. inspirando e expirando. E no seu tempo, voltando novamente a sua atenção para o seu corpo como um todo, sentindo como se o corpo todo respirasse, no mesmo compasso, uma mesma pulsação. Você pode então fazer uma ou duas respirações mais profundas e aos poucos, incluindo a temperatura do ambiente em que se encontra, os sons presentes nesse ambiente, o cheiro, se reconectando novamente com a parte exterior. E então você pode movimentar os seus pés, talvez mexer as suas mãos, fazendo um breve alongamento de qualquer parte do corpo que esteja pedindo nesse momento. E quando estiver preparado, você pode abrir os seus olhos. Muito bem, pessoal. Espero que tenham gostado, que tenham aproveitado esse momento, se aberto para esse momento, nesse tempo de incerteza em que estamos vivendo, com tantas mudanças, essa capacidade que nós temos de reinventar. Talvez peça algumas pausas durante o dia, essas práticas de mindfulness e outras práticas meditativas, caem bem nesse momento. Espero que tenham curtido. Caso tenham ficado com alguma dúvida, ou queiram saber mais sobre o meu trabalho, sobre a Aura Clara, estamos à disposição para recebê-los a qualquer momento. Vocês podem nos procurar pelas redes sociais da Aura Clara ou pelo site www.auraclara.com.br e teremos muito prazer de recebê-los.